that the United States today makes this policy. You have to remind yourself the United States have started the same as the countries of the global south today, so to make sovereign. There was a coup d'etat against the empire, and this problem is not been over, and it may take some time more. But we are here committed to manage this project and to find a solution for all the countries of the world.
Harley Schlanger bitten.
I would like to ask Harley Schlanger to come to the podium.
What I will demonstrate is that the recent visit of King Charles to Washington, D.C., and especially speech to the members of the U.S. Congress, were a deliberate provocation designed to revitalize the so-called special relationship, which Charles' peers in the City of London feared would be lost with Trump in the White House. The timing was part of the provocation, coming less than 3 months before the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. The King opened his address by expressing his gratitude to thank the American people for inviting us. After stating that he has the highest respect for the U.S. Congress, which is not so usual, he said, he belonged to a string of falsehoods about the interlinked destinies of the two countries. We are distinctly, he said, with the relationship which spans 4 centuries. Sharing, quote, in the British to forge a unique relation, Atlantic partnership, which is more face and increasingly pivoted fall for the resolve for the defense of Ukraine and her courageous people. We're building F-35 fighter, he said, and modern submarines for AUKUS to contain China. He referred to the new tech agreements signed when Trump was a guest at the banquet in Windsor Castle last September, where $42 billion in military tech and AI contracts were signed by CEOs of the two countries. British and American ingenuity lead the world, Charles exhorted, in an alliance to defend our shared partnership. Trump responded warmly, as he had during the September 17th banquet in London, calling the King, notorious as the promoter of Malthusian population reduction, a good guy. Echoing the King's narrative of the two nations' shared destinies, Trump said, "Our bond is priceless and eternal. It is irreplaceable and unbreakable." He lavished praise on the British Empire's, quote, culture, character, and creed. Our ancestors, he said, would surely be filled with awe and pride that the Anglo-American Revolution in human freedom has spread across the world. Basking in the glow generated by the sentimentality of these comments, it is not surprising that no one called attention to a report issued by Chatham House's International Relations and Defense Committee on April 22nd, just days before Charles' departure to the U.S. The report titled Adjusting to New Realities, Rebalancing the UK-US Partnership, and was presented to the House of Lords by Lord Robertson, the former Secretary General of NATO, who described it as finding that the UK could no longer count on the United States to defend their common interests and will have to develop more diverse partners. As for this trip being a provocation, not a single member of Congress addressed the glaring irony of the occasion, that Charles was promoting a delusional view of the strategic alliance to reaffirm the special relationship on the eve of the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, independence from Great Britain. Charles himself made a reference to the irony of his presence there, quipping that he had not come, quote, as part of some cunning rearguard action, unquote. Well, contrary to the fictional vision of the Anglo-American relationship presented by the King, there was no idea of an equal partnership between the City of London oligarchs and the American settlers from the 1607 establishment of the first permanent colony in Jamestown, Virginia, until today. The London imperialists treated their colonies with the same disregard as their imperial rivals did theirs, treating them as a source of raw material wealth, cheap labor, and in some cases, military assets. The British trading companies imported furs, lumber, naval stores, and fish, and deployed men from the colonies as soldiers, for example, against the French on the American front on the 7 Years' War from 1756 to 1763. A brief review of the history of the Massachusetts Bay Colony demonstrates the empire's intent. Founded in 1628, the charter was revoked in 1684 as the Americans began to rebel against their treatment by the empire. The Navigation Act of 1660 was passed by the Parliament to limit their economic freedom. It prohibited the use of non-British ships for trading, required that all exports, including raw materials, must first go through London, and that proceeds from trade must be used to purchase goods manufactured in Britain. The Act is an early example of imperial actions to undermine sovereignty with constraints imposed on countries. For example, the use of sanctions, embargo, structural adjustment plans, and so on, which continue today, for example, against Iran. This is what was praised by U.S. Treasury Secretary Besant as, quote, economic statecraft, unquote. Note that a recent report from the British military intelligence think tank, RUSI, held up the East India Company, which dissolved in 1874, as an example for multinational corporations to follow today. The passage of the Navigation Act generated resistance as it was correctly seen as an attack on the independence of the colonies. The Bay Company responded by coining their own money, the Pine Tree Shilling, to provide credit for farmers and entrepreneurs in the colony, and engaging in trade with other American colonies and European countries. Though such trading was considered by the British authorities to be smuggling, legal action was not pursued for fear of provoking rebellion. This changed in 1773 when the revenue of the India Company fell. To compensate, the Tea Act was passed, granting monopoly status to the East India Company tea sold in America. The next slide, please. Protests from Bay Colony officials were rejected, as were appeals to the Parliament to repeal the tax on tea. This provoked the Boston Tea Party on December 16, 1773, when colonial rebels threw the tea shipped to Boston on East India Company ships overboard into the harbor. In response, in July 1774, Parliament passed the Boston Port Act, which shut down the harbor, revoked the charter of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and mandated the trials of citizens be moved to London. Further, a demand for restitution to cover the losses of the East India Company was imposed, and the Quartering Act passed, which required the housing of British troops without the owner's permission, all of which served as a catalyst for rebellion. A last appeal to Parliament against these actions occurred on February 1st, 1775. It was rejected as Benjamin Franklin watched from the chamber. 2 months later, on April 18th, shots were fired against the British Army in Concord, Massachusetts, then again the next day in Lexington, the famous shot heard round the world. The disputes over economic trade policy were a reflection of a deeper gulf separating the colonies from London, a philosophical disagreement over the nature of man and the role of government. On one side was the English Enlightenment, so-called, in the tradition of British philosophical radicalism, as promoted by the theories of man of government of Thomas Hobbes and John Locke, who both served as propagandists for a feudal society in which an oligarchy ruled over human beasts. This was stated openly by Hobbes as a world in which life was condemned to be nasty, brutish, and short, dominated by an eternal war of each against all, in which the strongest prevail. For Hobbes, the avoidance of such a state depended on the existence of a powerful sovereign, a Leviathan, who ruled with absolute authority. Locke's social contract parallels Hobbes in many ways, except for his claim to support individual freedom. In practice, his liberalism is actually coherent with feudalism or neoliberalism. While espousing individual freedom, it remains subject to constraints imposed to benefit a ruling oligarchy, as proven by his support for free trade and free market policies and a balanced budget, and his defense of usury, slavery, and child labor. In 1694, Locke was involved in the creation of the Bank of England and was a member of the Council of Trade responsible for the Navigation Acts. In 1699, Locke drafted the Constitution for the government of the Carolinas with an emphasis on preserving the power of a landed aristocracy. In defending this, he wrote, "The preservation of property is a proper end of government." Long before the shots were fired in Concord and Lexington, a philosophical founder of the Massachusetts colony, providing an inspiration for those who followed him, including Cotton Mather, whose Essays to Do Good influenced Benjamin Franklin. Winthrop's dedication to a republic in the New World is the subject of a book, How the Nation Was Won, written in 1987 by LaRouche associate, the late Graham Lowry. The fight over the primacy of the defense of private property is one of the subjects that reflects the irreconcilable difference between the British and American view. While Locke puts defense of private property as an end of government, the Declaration of Independence makes life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness the business of government. And while Jefferson's original draft described the truths underlying the ends of government to be sacred and undeniable, Franklin changed the wording to read, "We hold these truths to be self-evident," which implies a process of discovery on the part of the citizen. The fight against Locke's neoliberalism was an extension of the efforts of German scientist-philosopher Gottfried Leibniz, and was part of a broader campaign against British empiricism conducted by Leibniz in collaboration with Republican scientists in England, including Jonathan Swift and Robert Harley, and in Germany. Leibniz's co-thinkers included Abraham Kästner, the founder of anti-Euclidean geometry, and his students Milius and Lessing, and included co-thinkers in Leipzig, Berlin, and Göttingen. Through the outreach of the Leibnizian James Logan, the American Benjamin Franklin was brought into collaboration with this anti-Lockean, anti-Newtonian network. In 1766, during a visit to Germany, he met with Kästner in Göttingen. The intellectual ferment spreading from these circles was made available to co-thinkers in the American colonies through Franklin with his Junto group, which he established in 1727. This network was developed to fight against British empiricism, which was the guiding philosophical current behind the Empire's campaign to crush the growing rebellion against it. The view of the social contract of Locke and those who came after him, such as Newton and Bentham, was coherent with his view of the static nature of the physical universe. For Locke, the human mind could register sensations, but like the mind of a beast, could not create. Had he lived to see it, Locke would have been horrified by the assertion in the Declaration of Independence that governments derive, quote, their just powers from the consent of the governed, unquote, and that when governments become destructive of these ends, as had the British government with the denial of rights to the colonies, quote, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such governments, unquote. To those anti-Lockean Americans, happiness required the freedom to change axioms when one discovers that the prevailing axioms are wrong. Locke's materialist philosophy was premised on the idea of a static universe, knowledge of which was restricted to the senses. Newton echoed this belief in an entropic universe. In contrast, Leibniz's hypothesis of a dynamic, anti-entropic universe, a concept central to Lyndon LaRouche's work on physical economy, presented a challenge which required creativity to imagine. And taking on this challenge and its application to science and economy was the source of happiness. It's reflected in the question Leibniz poses in his 1671 article, Society and Economy, when he asks, "Is not the entire purpose of society to release the artisan from misery?" One of the opponents of the American Revolution in Britain was Jeremy Bentham, who put forward his utilitarian theory of happiness to counter Franklin. In his Fragment on Government in 1776, he presented a contentless conception of happiness, declaring that the greatest happiness of the greatest number is the measure of right and wrong. He expanded on disagreements in his short review of the Declaration, dismissing the argument for separation from Britain by writing, quote, "Of the preamble, I have taken little or no notice. The truth is, little or none is deserved," unquote. Continuing to display his contempt for the arguments of Franklin's allies, he wrote, quote, "The opinions of modern Americans on government would be too ridiculous to deserve any notice." He concluded by asserting that there exist, quote, "no natural and unalienable rights," rejecting the maxims of the Declaration as, quote, "repugnant to the British Constitution." The surrender of the British in Yorktown, Virginia in October 1781 ended the successful War of Independence against Britain. It was a victory for the concept of government based not on the power of weapons or money, but of ideas. This battle has continued to the present day. It was reflected in a letter from John Adams to Thomas Jefferson written in 1815. Adams, a founding father who was the second president of the United States, wrote, "What do we mean by the revolution? The war? That was no part of the revolution. It was only an effect and consequence of it. The revolution was in the minds of the people, and this was effected from 1760 to 1775 in the course of 15 years before a drop of blood was shed at Lexington," unquote. He said the truth of this could be found in the articles and pamphlets produced to inspire the colonists to fight the better armed and funded imperial forces. This battle continued for the next century and a half, as the concept of a republic committed to the principles enumerated in its founding documents was repeatedly tested, at times by war, but also by subversive attacks against the ideals of its founders. One of the promoters of this idea of the Declaration was Henry Carey, an advisor to President Lincoln, whose father Matthew had been an ally and publisher of Ben Franklin. In 1851, Carey wrote a pamphlet, The Harmony of Interests, which was a report on this continuing fight. Carey wrote, quote, "Two systems are before the world. One looks to pauperism, ignorance, depopulation, and barbarism. The other to increasing wealth, comfort, intelligence, combination of action, and civilization. One looks toward universal war, the other to universal peace. One is the English system, the other we may be proud to call the American system," unquote. Pursuit of happiness was embedded in the American mentality. Coming into the presidency in the dark, gloomy days of the Great Depression, President Franklin Roosevelt insisted that people not give in to fear, but to take action, embodied in his call to throw the money changers out of the temple. He added, in the tradition of physical economy promoted by Leibniz and Franklin, "Happiness does not lie in the mere possession of money. It lies in the joy of achievement, in the thrill of creative effort." The oligarchy of the City of London never ended its efforts to stamp out the American system. After World War II, British leader Sir Winston Churchill invented the term special relationship, as he was desperately seeking a means of sustaining the power of empire as its actual physical productive power was in rapid decline. Having failed to convince the Americans in the aftermath of the victory over Nazis, to join the British in an invasion of the USSR in Operation Unthinkable, Churchill enlisted Harry Truman to place the U.S. military and economic power behind the British plan for sustaining the empire as a crucial ally during the war. This included the creation of NATO, which was aptly described by one of its creators, Lord Ismay, as having one job: to keep the Soviet Union out, the Americans in, and the Germans down. As an expression of classic City of London geopolitics, this remains a danger to the USA to the present day. On July 4th of this year, as we commemorate the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, the best way to give thanks to the founding fathers of the United States is to reassert the principles which underlie our freedoms, as elaborated in this document, and to reject the appeals from today's imperialists that we revive the special relationship. Instead, accept the challenges before us in the American way. Be happy.
Next speaker will be His Excellency Eskindir Yirga Asfaw from Ethiopia, and he is the ambassador of the Ethiopian state, and he will speak on the uncolonized, independent beacon and its path to prosperity. Please come.
Thank you so much. I hope you all can hear me. Good morning. Helga Sepp LaRouche, founder of the Schiller Institute, my good friend, Ambassador Majid Nili, Ambassador of the Islamic Republic of Iran, Germany, distinguished delegates, esteemed members of the Schiller Institute, ladies and gentlemen. First and foremost, allow me to express my deepest gratitude to the International Schiller Institute for the kind invitation and for organizing this important conference here in Berlin. This city, which has witnessed historic and momentous occasions in human history, provides a fitting backdrop for a discussion on timely topics such as sovereignty, development, and the unbreakable spirit of nations for freedom. I am profoundly honored to address you today and share with you the journey of my country, Ethiopia. It's not usual in forums in European capitals to find a platform where the voice of Africa or countries from Africa can be heard. Allow me to say a few words about my country, Ethiopia. Ethiopia, the land of origin, and a place where humanity begins. Ethiopia is not merely a country. It is a civilization older than most nations. It is the land of origin, the very cradle of humankind. It was in the Afar Depression that our oldest ancestor, Lucy, her Amharic name, Dinkinesh, walked the earth over 3.2 million years ago. But our civilization didn't stop there. From the kingdom of Aksum, one of the great powers of the ancient world, to the 11th century rock queen churches of Lalibela, from the obelisks of Aksum to the castles of Gondar, Ethiopia has maintained a continuous, unbroken civilization and statehood for over 3 millennia. Today, Ethiopia stands first in Africa for intangible and tangible UNESCO-registered World Heritage. We are the only African nation with its own indigenous script, alphabet, called the Ge'ez, and an independent calendar that still marks this year as 2018 as we speak. So if you come to my country, you will be 8 years younger. This is not a hyperbole. This is history. We also gave coffee to the world, hence land of origins. We are also the source of the Blue Nile, a river that contributes 86% of the water reaching Egypt and sustaining world's ancient civilization in the Nile Valley. As my good friend mentioned, we are also the uncolonized exception. When we talk about Africa, we have to look at history holistically, in the whole perspective. Defiance against the scramble for Africa, or defiance against colonial rule. As history tells us, the European powers that took part in the infamous Berlin Conference, 1884-85, are said to have recognized Ethiopia as a colonial Italy's sphere of influence, though it was a sovereign in itself at the time. However, there was a lot of reckoning on the part of Italy, and conquest did not take place in the immediate post-Berlin period. Why? Because Ethiopia was already a sovereign nation that could not be carved. While the scramble for Africa extinguished the independence of nations throughout Africa, Liberia aside, Ethiopia stood alone as the only African nation that never fell under colonial rule. When colonial Italy encroached, attempting to impose the infamous Treaty of Wuchale, a fraud that claimed a protectorate in the Italian version of the treaty, while the Amharic text said no such thing, the then Ethiopia's Emperor Menelik II exposed the deception with diplomatic brilliance. War followed. Italy, armed with modern artillery and feeling superior, marched into the mountains of Tigray in northern Ethiopia. Hence, the Battle of Adwa, the thunder that shook the world. On the morning of March 1st, 1986, at Adwa, Ethiopian forces, united under Emperor Menelik II and the legendary Empress Taitu Butul, who commanded her own army, annihilated the Italian colonial forces. Let the record stand. Ethiopia did not win by ambush or attribution. It won in a conventional, open field battle against a modern European army. The Italian general at the time, General Baratieri, forces were surrounded and crushed. Over 7,000 Italian soldiers died, 3,000 were taken prisoner. The victory at Adwa resonated across every colonized continent. It proved color-based supremacist belief that gave reason for colonial aggression is wrong. It sent a clear message: Africa could defeat Europe. For Ethiopians, it was not merely a battle. It was a declaration of eternal freedom. Adwa became the beacon of freedom for the black race all over the world, inspiring anti-colonial movements from Jamaica to South Africa and heralding Pan-Africanism movements all over the world. As Ethiopia has never lost its independence, it was able to take seat at the high table of nations when others could not. In 1923, Ethiopia joined the League of Nations, one of the only two independent African nations to do so. When fascist Italy invaded again in 1935, the then Ethiopia's Emperor Haile Selassie stood before the League of Nations and delivered a prophetic warning, and I quote, "It is us today, it will be you tomorrow." The League failed Ethiopia then, but Ethiopia never failed the cause of collective security. After World War II, Ethiopia became a founding member of the United Nations in 1945. Again, one of the 4 African nations to sign the UN Charter as a founding member along the great powers. And when the winds of African liberation blew in 1963, Ethiopia hosted the founding conference of the Organization of African Unity in Addis Ababa, now the African Union. Today, our capital remains the diplomatic capital of Africa. housing over 137 embassies and a significant number of regional and international organizations, in addition, of course, to hosting the headquarters of the African Union. Very recently, Ethiopia has joined BRICS, a reflection of our growing economic weight and our commitment to a multipolar, equitable world order. We stand firmly for multilateralism, believing that no nation, however powerful, should dictate to another. Ethiopia is playing a lead role in the UN peacekeeping with its largest troop contribution. It's playing a lead in climate negotiations, in trade forums. Ethiopia seeks the principle of international law must apply equally and to all. However, despite Africa's independence from colonialism, some relative political independence, economic dependence still remains. We are working for economic renaissance. And allow me to say a few things about Ethiopia's drive to prosperity. Today, non-complacent with our rich history, we are designing our pathways of prosperity. We are embarking on an extraordinary path to prosperity. Let me give you some facts. Ethiopia, with over 130 million people, is the second most populous nation in Africa, following Nigeria. It's a strategic hub in the Horn of Africa, bordering. Today, we might see trouble, but countries with big, huge potentials like South Sudan, Kenya, Somalia, Djibouti, and Eritrea, with access to the Red Sea via ports in Djibouti and our own revitalized naval ambitions. We are just 60 kilometers away from the Red Sea. For over a decade, before recent global shocks, our economy has grown double-digit for more than 10 years, one of the fastest in the world. Even amid pandemic and conflict, our economy is now growing at an average of 7 to 9% every year. We have done a lot of deep reforms. We have designed our own system called Maddamer, which is literally translated as synergy, whereby all citizens participate in nation-building processes regardless of individual ideology or outlook. We have opened sectors for private investment in telecommunication, banking, and logistics. We have also not forgotten the environment, the Green Legacy Initiative, and what is very important for Africa, food sovereignty. We in Ethiopia believe prosperity cannot be built on a degraded environment. That's why my Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, launched a Green Legacy Initiative. In just 5 years, Ethiopia has planted over 40 billion seedlings. It's not a typo, 40 billion. We have restored degraded land, increased forest cover, and built one of the largest reforestation campaigns in world history. Most of the trees planted are fruit-bearing plants that assist our journey towards food independence. Food sovereignty, esteemed brothers, sisters, is very important for Africa. Ethiopia, my country, was once synonymous with drought. It is no longer. Through concerted efforts in agricultural transformation, we have achieved near self-sufficiency in wheat, increased productivity of teff and maize, and built strategic grain reserves. Our goal is not just to feed ourselves, but to become a breadbasket for the region. Our industrial revolution has to kick in. We want to be the manufacturing hub of Africa, so to say, the next Asian tiger. Ethiopia has set its sights on becoming a manufacturing hub. Why? Because we have an affordable, trainable, young labor force. Can you imagine what the median age in my country is? 19. 19. So everyone in my country is young. We have a potential for renewable energy. Just from hydropower, we can generate 45,000 megawatts of electricity with huge potential for wind, solar, and geothermal. We are also located strategically, and that's why we have established close to 26 industrial parks throughout the country. We're not chasing low-end industry, low-end textiles. We're building agro-processing, pharmaceuticals, and electronic vehicles assembly and manufacturing in the transport infrastructure. Let me give you one fact. In Ethiopia, as we speak, a legislation has passed to ban the import of combustion engine vehicles. We have hit the mark of 150,000 electric vehicles in the capital alone. Ethiopia is transiting. It's becoming green. It is capturing the new technology. We do so while building monumental infrastructures in the country. Let me mention two: the Renaissance Dam and the new Bishoftu International Airport. The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam is the largest hydropower project in Africa, with a capacity of 5,150 megawatts. It is providing clean, affordable electricity to over 60% of our population that currently lives without power. It is not a threat to downstream neighbors. It is a cooperative platform. The GERD is complete, fully operational, and powering our industrial revolution. And we are exporting power to all neighboring countries, all the way to Rwanda now. But there is a story behind this dam, which proves the resilience of Ethiopians. When we failed to secure money to build this dam, each Ethiopian contributed from their pocket by buying bonds, saying this is a national project, a national plan. So for us, we see a lesson that if we really want to change, we have to take the bull, so to say, by the horn, and we have to do it ourselves first, and then ask like-minded friends and countries to help. The Bishoftu International Airport is the second big infrastructural project in Africa. It is new state-of-the-art aviation hub. Ethiopian Airlines, already Africa's largest and most profit airline, with 140 international and 30 domestic destinations, operated with its current fleet of 200 planes. When other airports are closing, when other airlines are declaring bankruptcy, Ethiopian Airlines is prospering. The new airport, which will be built just 50 kilometers from the capital, is designed to handle 100 million passengers annually. It will solidify Addis Ababa as an aviation gateway to Africa. It's not a dream. Construction is already underway. Projects of strategic importance, such as a $4 billion USD fertilizer project with Dangote and a revitalized hospitality industry, is happening. We are looking to 2027 to host the COP32, where the world will come and convene in my country. Why do I mention all these things? Ladies and gentlemen, I say this because Ethiopia is no longer seeking handouts. We work and advocate for a shared prosperity with our immediate neighbors and beyond. Our path to prosperity is defined by one principle above all, which is the right of Ethiopian people to determine their own destiny without external interference. I will repeat it: the right of the Ethiopian people to determine their own destiny without external interference. We've seen too many nations giving aid with strings attached or advices that serve foreign interests. Ethiopia fought colonialism with blood. It will not surrender its sovereignty now. We're opposed to any form of coercion that come in the guise of conditionality. As a country, we have made our mistakes. Yes, internal conflicts, ethnic tensions, and challenges remain. But we are confronting them through national dialogue, inclusive reform, and homegrown solutions. In this noble endeavor, we need partners, not masters. That's why we are at the forefront of the countries advocating for the principle of African solutions to African problems in the UN and other multilateral forums. In conclusion, I will make a call for partnership with dignity. The Schiller Institute has long championed the ideals of universal humanity, peace, and development. I say to you today, look at Ethiopia not as a charity case, but as a civilization reborn. From Lucy to GERD, from Adwa to BRICS, from drought to food sovereignty, my country, Ethiopia, is writing a new narrative. Let us work together then, Berlin and Addis Ababa, Europe and Africa, and the other remaining the world, in a spirit of equal partnership, by investing in industrial parks, by buying from factories, learn from our restoration schemes, and respecting our choices. We are a country devoid of colonial inhibitions, a beacon, so to say, and that light has not dimmed. It is now illuminating our path to prosperity. Thank you, and may peace prevail among all nations. Thank you so much.
So, nächster Redner wird sein
The next speaker
Seine
will be
Exzellenz Majid.
His Excellency Majid Nili, Iranian ambassador of the Republic of Islamic Republic of Iran. Iran. Yeah. We hope that it will be as interesting and informative as the speech of of the speaker before. Good day.
Excellency, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great honor and pleasure to participate in this important conference here in Berlin. I would like to sincerely thank the organizers of Schiller Institute for bringing together scholars, diplomats, and think tanks from different parts of the world to discuss one of the most important questions of our time, the future of international order and the dialogue among civilizations. My remarks or words, or the core of my remark is for 1.5 minutes. Rest of them is for more collaboration, more elaboration. At the outset of my remark, I would like to raise 5 brief questions and answers. Number 1, has the colonial system come to an end? Response is yes, formally yes. Number 2, do we still suffer from its bitter legacy and consequences? Undoubtedly, yes. The third question, what evidence supports this claim? Gaza, with more than 8,100 people as civilians, Lebanon, Sudan, Venezuela, Greenland, Ukraine, and recent Cuba, and recently my country. You know, my country have been invaded by American missiles, Israeli missiles, 2 times, less than 1 year. You know, we defended very well. The aggressors, they were not winner. We were, and we are, winner. Another question, what is the solution? The response is moving toward a new, just, and balanced international order. The last question, how? By returning to civilian or to civilizational capacities through dialogue, resistance, and resilience. Allow me to elaborate more. Today, humanity stands at a historic crossroads. We are witnessing profound geopolitical, economic, and cultural transformations that are reshaping foundations of international relations over recent decades. In such a period of uncertainty, dialogue, mutual respect, and international cooperation become more necessary than ever before. Let me start with the topic of a world in transition, from unipolar to multipolar. The international system today is fundamentally different from the one that emerged after the Cold War. For several decades, global affairs were largely shaped by a unipolar structure in which decision-making power in political, economic, and security matters was concentrated among a limited number of actors or countries. However, recent developments clearly indicate that this phase is gradually giving way to a more complex multipolar reality. Emerging economies, regional powers, and countries of the global south are increasingly seeking a greater role in shaping international decisions that affect their development and security. This shift reflects not only changes in power distribution, but also a broader demand for more equitable and representative global governance. Although colonialism formally ended several decades ago, many structural inequalities continue to shape the international system today, unfortunately. Countries still face economic dependency, unequal global structures, limited influence in international decision-making, and more than that, warmongering. At this point, the central questions before us is not only how to manage crisis, but how to construct a more balanced, inclusive, and sustainable international order. This is a huge gap between the global south and global north in terms of economic development and political stability. Dear friends, the world order is under significant transformation over the past few years. In this context, I would like to highlight 5 key developments that I think they are the main elements for coming order. First, we are witnessing a gradual distribution of global power and influence in which no single actor is likely to maintain exclusive leadership within the international system. The current conflict involving Iran demonstrates the growing limitations of American power and its increasing dependence on allies and partners for military and economic support. This reflects a weakening of the United States. Second, emerging regional and multilateral frameworks such as BRICS, as my friend mentioned, the Shanghai Cooperation countries, the Asians, the African Union, are playing an increasing important role in political and economic and even cultural cooperation, and more than that, scientific cooperation. Third, resistance and resilience against domination, foreign intervention, and externally imposed political models are growing across the world. States, NGOs, not governmental actors are increasingly asserting their sovereignty, defending their independence, and rejecting outside interference in their internal affairs. Fourth, we are observing the gradual emergence of a more civilizational, diverse understanding of world order, in which different cultural and historical experiences contribute to global governance. Fifth, the United Nations requires meaningful reform. The current system must evolve toward greater neutrality, inclusiveness, and a more balanced distribution of influence, including reconsideration of the veto mechanism. Where is the role of Iran? Iran represents one of the world's oldest civilizations and has historically served as a bridge between culture, religions, regions, and intellectual traditions. The Iranian perspective on international relations has long emphasized dialogue, peaceful coexistence, mutual respect, and cultural understanding. In this regard, the concept of the dialogue among civilizations remain highly relevant in today's polarized world, and Iran firmly believes that lasting peace can be achieved through confrontation or exclusion, but only through respect, dignity, diplomacy, and constructive engagement among nations and civilizations. Iran always promotes peace and stands for peace and justice, while defends against any kind of aggressions very well. In discussing the evolving international order, it is also necessary to address persistent challenges related to the application of international law and the principle of the state sovereignty. Iran has over many years faced sustained external pressure, including economic sanctions, as you said, political coercive measures, and security-related threats, which it considers inconsistent with the principles of the United Nations Charter and the norms of international law as well. In addition, Iran has been directly affected by active involving targeted security incidents and military tensions, which have contributed to instability and heightened insecurity in parts of the Western Asia. From Iran's perspective, such developments illustrate the risks associated with selective approaches to international law and force or pressure outside the framework of multilateral legitimacy. The broader implication of these policies is not limited to Iran alone, but extends to the weakening of trust in international norms and institutions. At the same time, Iran has consistently emphasized that sustainable security cannot be achieved through escalation or containment strategy, but only through dialogue, respect for sovereignty, and adheres to international law without double standard. As an example, you know, not long ago, one of Iranian school, elementary school, have been targeted by 2 American missiles. More than 168 children, 10 years old children, girls, boys have been targeted. No any condemnation from some countries at all. This is a double standard. The life of innocent people, children, how does it have sense for military actions? Are they soldiers? No. 10 years old, boys, girls, they are not soldiers. They are looking for future. Why they have been targeted and why there is silence in terms of condemnation. Strengthening multilateral diplomacy and restoring confidence in international legal frameworks therefore remains essential for regional and global stability. The last point in this item, Iran has challenged the US power. Recent war is a good example. Conclusion. I would like to emphasize that humanity's future depends not on domination or confrontation, but on cooperation, dialogue, mutual understanding, resilience, and shared responsibility. We are on the same boat, no matter where we live, in America, Africa, Europe, Western Asia. In today's interconnected world, mistrust and division must give way to diplomacy and constructive engagement. Justice, equality, and mutual respect must remain the foundational principles of international relations. Only through inclusive dialogue and international cooperation we can build a peaceful, stable, and sustainable global order for future generations. Thank you.
So, jetzt haben wir
Okay, now
Herrn Daud.
we have Daud Azimi from Afghanistan. He is here for the IBM Research Organization, and that should also be very interesting.
Sehr geehrte Damen und Herren,
Ladies and gentlemen, Salam alaikum.
zunächst möchte ich dem Schiller-Institut in besonderer
First of all, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to the Schiller Institute and in particular Mrs. Helga Zepp-Lausch for giving us the opportunity to speak here today and present our work.
Wir schätzen diese
We
wichtige
greatly appreciate this important conference and its focus on the urgent need for a new international security and architecture. We are convinced that this discussion is taking place at the right time and is of great significance for the future of many developing and crisis-stricken countries, including Afghanistan. My name is Daud Azimi, and I'm speaking today on behalf of the Ibn Sina Research and Development Organization, an independent, non-political, and non-profit Afghan organization dedicated to knowledge, development, and future planning. It is a great honor for us to be here today. I would like to take this opportunity thank the Schiller Institute for its special commitment to Afghanistan. Following the political changes in 2021,
ich möchte diese Gelegenheit auch nutzen, dem Schiller-Institut für seine
I
besonderen
would also like to take the opportunity to thank the Schiller Institute. Following the political changes in 2021, many Afghans felt that their country was increasingly being forgotten by the international community. With the Operation Ibn Sina initiative, the Schiller Institute sent an important signal regarding construction, infrastructure development, and the creation of long-term prospects for Afghanistan. Today, together with partners in Kabul, we were able to present and discuss these ideas at the conference. The response was very positive. Approximately 600 men and 200 women attended the conference. For this, we would like to express our sincere thanks to the Schiller Institute. Ladies and gentlemen, the world today faces numerous challenges simultaneously. instability, economic uncertainty, energy problems, climate risks, migration, and growing poverty. In many developing countries, people suffer not only from a lack of security, but also from a lack of prospects, weak institutions, and limited access to education and health care. This is why we are convinced that security and development cannot be separated. Lasting stability does not arise solely through political or military measures. It requires economic opportunities, functioning institutions, infrastructure, education, and the opportunity for people to help shape their own future. Afghanistan illustrates this reality particularly clearly. For decades, our country has suffered from war, poverty, destroyed infrastructure, and the loss of many skilled professionals. Despite these difficulties, Afghanistan continues to possess enormous potential. A young population, significant natural resources, a strategic geographic location, and many people who want to learn, work, and contribute to building their country. What Afghanistan needs today is more than humanitarian aid. It needs long-term development, strong institutions, strategic planning, and reliable partnerships. It is for our organization was founded on this conviction. Many of us have recognized that Afghanistan needs more space for long-term thinking, knowledge exchange, and future planning, especially in countries affected by conflict. Little capacity to engage with long-term strategies and sustainable development processes. Yet it is precisely these factors that are crucial if a country to achieve lasting stability and prosperity. We believe that the reconstruction of Afghanistan involves more than just roads, bridges, or buildings. It also encompasses the development of knowledge, expertise, trust, and effective institutions. This is why we bring together Afghan professionals from different regions, groups, and professional fields. We are convinced that Afghanistan's diversity can be a strength and that the country's future can only be shaped through collaboration. Our organization is neutral and apolitical. Our focus is on development, cooperation, and serving the people. Regardless of political changes, projects that promote education, health, infrastructure, and economic development should continue. We are currently working on several initiatives, including an energy master plan for Afghanistan. Energy is one of the most important foundations for economic development, industry, agriculture, education, healthcare, and social stability. In addition, we address issues such as health, agriculture, water management, vocational training, digital knowledge systems, and long-term development strategies. We are also preparing an economic and investment conference for Afghanistan. It is intended to serve as a platform for dialogue, investment, cooperation, and reconstruction, and bring together various stakeholders. We are convinced that the reconstruction of Afghanistan requires the cooperation of many partners, government institutions, international organizations, research institutions, investors, companies, and local communities. Dear friends, Afghanistan cannot walk this path alone. It needs cooperation, knowledge exchange, technical support, and long-term partnerships. Above all, it needs people and institutions that continue to believe that positive changes is possible. Afghanistan is often perceived solely through the lens of war and crises, yet behind these headlines are millions of people who long for peace, dignity, education, work, and a better future for their families. There are numerous Afghan professionals, both within and outside the country, who are ready to take on responsibility and contribute to construction if the necessary opportunities are created. Sustainable peace cannot be brought about from outside alone. It arises through education, trust, economic development, functioning institutions, and active participation of the peoples themselves. Ladies and gentlemen, we are still a young organization. We do not claim to have all the answers, but we pursue our mission with sincerity, professionalism, and a firm desire to make a constructive contribution to Afghanistan's future. Today, we are not merely presenting our work, we want to build bridges between Afghanistan and national community.
Die Zukunft Afghanistans und viele andere Entwicklungsländer kann nur gemeinsam gestaltet werden.
Thank you for your attention.
So, es ist eine Videobotschaft aus Uganda angekündigt.
We have a video.
Doru, and I am here with
Emmanuel Mungatihe,
Timothy Ninsima,
and Robert Luge.
This is the team from Uganda, and we are delighted to also add our voice on the crucial topic, which is the 500, how to end the 500 years of colonialism and that as the global south. The world has always told people that power belongs to a few nations, a few voices, and a few empires. And also history had already chosen its winners and losers. But what is our take as the global south?
Indeed, we really have something to say as Africa. I will just give a simple clue how it started. Initially, we had something that we have trade, and this is where our ancestors used to sell us for simple things, for example, just to acquire salt, bread, and indeed, life was taken for manual work. Secondly, after that, we had something that we call classical colonialism, and this is where we had direct governance. The colonial masters used to come direct on the ground, implement the policies, give direct orders, which was really pressing onto the African life. So that's where we started having nations gaining independence to get out of this colonialism. Now here comes another wave of colonialism, the one we call neo-colonialism. This one comes in different ways. For example, technology. You find that we are enjoying good technology, for example, the internet, Google, but this is not something which is invented by Africa. I'll give the second example of neo-colonialism, the ideology, where you find that African culture is now fading away. It is being impregnated by Western culture. I'll give the third one, which is the economic neo-colonialism. We are being put under debt trap. You find that we're enjoying good infrastructure, for example, roads, but these are the things which are being built up on debt and we are being demanded. So what do we have to do about this? This is where we have to come up with an alternative way to end this neo-colonialism.
Thank you very much, Emma. And I think I'll pick up from there. As we are planning to transition from the 500 years of colonialism, we are supposed to, first of all, have alternatives. As the African continent, all the states, if you want to change the paradigm, you want to have a new way to go, you must have alternatives to such infrastructure that enslaves you in some things. For the technology, we must have our own technology. We have seen how China has alternatives to most of the social media platforms we use. So that already solves the issue of cultural enslavement or ideological dependence. Then, when we look at financial infrastructure, which is really now the biggest part of the neocolonialism that we have, we do not have set up infrastructure or systems where they are not governed by the global north. So that already brings in economic dependence. So if you want to break that, we need to have infrastructure of our own in the financial systems. We have seen the concept of BRICS coming up, and most African states are actually partners as we talk. This is a good way to go, but if they also bring in systems that enhance independence or special representation in these talks, it would be really good. However, on that very point, if we pivot and look on the other side, what does Africa contribute on the table of international independence if we are planning to go in this new paradigm? Africa already has fragile systems. It is not yet there technologically. It exports raw materials, it imports technology. But looking at that, we have systems. We bring ourselves up and actually have a right to speak on these tables. For instance, we have the population. By 2050, we are going to have a bigger population, up to 2.5 billion raw materials, and as Africa, I assure you we shall have a say in the next 25 years to come. Therefore, we encourage that we build our systems and also focus on the small things like industrialization before we get into advanced competitions with countries like China, with US in AI. We need first to build our small industries in energy, mineral development, and industrialization. Yeah, thank you.
So there's no doubt that the future is African. As my friend has told you, we shall be 2.5 billion. So meaning the population will rise. We need to create jobs for all those people. And the population rise without having skilled population. No population, they say, is a double-edged sword. If it's highly skilled, it would benefit you. That's the only way Africa could benefit from its population. But if the population is not highly skilled, it may end up being a burden. So we need to put a lot of skills in our young men, and also encourage and change the way they think. For example, the education system here is majorly theoretical and not practical, and it ends up enslaving the minds of our young men. But also look at the technology. For instance, if maybe to give an example, Google shuts down its operations in Uganda, do we have alternatives for that technology? Shall we survive? So there's no way you can end 500 years if you have nothing to put on the dinner table. So you have to contribute something. But also telling our own story, because I think if we tell our own stories, because the truth is that there is hope. African countries are rising. But because we don't tell positive stories about us, then someone else can tell a different story. So we should tell our own stories and encourage cooperation between countries. Let those ones who have the technology cooperate with those who do not have. The haves cooperate with the have-nots. And that's how we shall end up fighting the 500 years which have been in prison against us. Thomas Sankara once said that he who feeds you controls you. I think this is the right moment for Africa to reduce on it being fed and also contribute something by feeding itself. Thank you very much for listening to us, and this is the team from Uganda. Bye-bye.
So, sehr erfrischend. Ja,
so refreshing. We now come to the discussion round. I would like to ask the speakers to come on the podium. So, if you're ready to listen to us, then I would like to start with a question to the Ethiopian ambassador. You have experience with meetings with German and other European politicians. What's your assessment with their readiness to accept the Ethiopian position?
Thank you so much. Actually, it's very important and you've asked me. You know, Ethiopia and Germany has a very historic relation. Actually, this year we're celebrating 120 years of diplomatic relation. It was in 1905. Ethiopia and Germany officially established diplomatic relations. Throughout these years, we have cooperated in many areas. One that stands out is vocational training, education, capacity building. But to come to your point, it's not always that my country, Ethiopia, Africa, is very well understood in the German context. Sometimes the way even the public understands or view Africa doesn't necessarily correspond with the realities that are at home. For that reason, we have our own differences on how we see and interpret things. Our goals, our vision may be the same. We need to have of this sort so that we understand each other. We put a context as to what we want. For instance, let me put one example to you. There is a national election in my country. And by far, it is one of the most open democratic processes that we've gone through. But from the German perspective, it may not look like it because there are some standards that are already set. And within those standards, it may not look right. But for us who lives and breathes there, we see the changes. Is it changing as far as we want it? Maybe not. So it is those things. But my final point to summarize is I personally fear that German is losing on the potentials, economic potentials of Africa, because there is a hesitancy to engage with Africa as partners. There is a sense of unease as to whether it is secure enough, it is safe enough, and not really. I mean, that hesitancy, I fear, will hurt German as much as it hurts us. So that understanding has to happen, and happen quickly. Thank you.
Sprechen können über die Wochen, auch über Afrika. Und interessant
I have talked
ist,
with some entrepreneurs in the last few weeks, also from Africa, and some pointed out that German enterprises would like to engage more in Africa, but they see that there are certain risks, and that's understandable, but we don't have to take it that way, that we do anything when there is a risk. We have to make an effort that together with African nations and governments who are advanced a little bit, such as Ethiopia, also Egypt, Nigeria are being recommended by the German state, and risk are always different than one would think. So to engage is better than to not engage. That's what came out from the discussions that I had. It is the case when we talk about the revolution, American. Das Mikrofon ist leider, der Mikrofon ist off. I cannot hear him.
Ist ja dort ja viel besser.
Oh no, now I can hear him again. The discussion, the situation of slave trade is certainly something which has been talked about, but there has also been a lot of development help in Africa. It's not that everything that comes from USA would be bad. There's also many good things. We should also emphasize that. Or what do you think? No. We cannot hear him.
How about now? Yes? How much time do we have to find out what the U.S. has done wrong over the years? The more important question is whether there's a possibility for the United States to shift policy now in the tradition of the anti-colonial revolution that took place in 1776 and inspired much of the world, despite the incompleteness of that revolution. One of the great qualities of the U.S. Constitution is the ability to change as principles are discovered and errors are discovered. Now, this is not what we see with President Trump, who changes what he says almost every couple of hours, but actually a change in principle back to the principles of cooperation and economic development. Now, when you talk about the slave trade, this was a very significant part of the Western colonial policy, to take people from Africa and from other parts of the world and put them to work for nothing as slaves in the plantations in the West. The key point here is that Abraham Lincoln was a very devoted thinker when it came to this idea of the American Revolution. And he fought for the nation to not only end slavery, but to develop for the United States for all its people, as well as for the rest of the world, as an example. And the policies that were good in the American system came to Europe, to Germany, to France, to other countries, and these were then opposed by the same British Empire with geopolitics that led to 2 wars in the last century and is leading to a whole series of wars today. That's why it's so important that we look to the United States with the potential for change, especially from young people who are resisting and fighting against the policies of the current war hawks of the military-industrial complex. And so this kind of forum here, where we have a chance to talk with people from around the world and build a true movement of new security and development architecture, that's the fight for the immediate period. And this will shape, hopefully, the next hundreds of years. We won't have to wait 500 more years. We can't, because we're about to see an explosion and a collapse of the existing economy. So the urgency from this conference and from the Schiller Institute and from the International Peace Coalition is to seek allies around the world and fight in the United States and Europe for the policies that represent this new paradigm of mutual benefit and cooperation. So that's what I could say, Ryan.
If I may add on that, I mean, I couldn't agree more. The traditional partners, the countries that has been working with Africa for long, have not yet articulated a partnership that is mutually beneficial. That's how I feel. Yes, Africa is mentioned in policy documents today, but Africa is highlighted when there is a need for critical raw materials or where there is a need for market. But to view at Africa, not holistically, Africa is not, this monolithic entity. It is a continent of 54, 55 countries with their own identities, with their own personalities, with their own view of the world. So having that concerted policy where Africa is seen, felt, cooperated as a partner is really important. Otherwise, we will lose valuable time where we will be able to benefit. And that also works for Germany. It has to articulate a much better policy towards Africa.
Ja, ich würde gerne eine Frage stellen an den Vertreter der Ibn Sina Research.
I would like to pose a question to the Ibn Sina Research Foundation. Ibn Sina has been not only an exceptional mind 800 years ago, but he was in dialogue with other scientists of his time, where Europe still was rather backward. But when the Islamic world, from Morocco to West China, so there was a dialogue over scientific questions in this whole area. Can you say something about that? The name is for us very important. So the name was chosen or proposed by Mrs. Helga Zepp-LaRouche because she had the idea that if you choose such a person that lived in a high cultural highlight of Afghanistan. Of course, this was at the time when the world was in exchange with each other, from North Africa to China, and where knowledge was transferred, whether in medicine or other areas. But unfortunately, today we're living in a time where Goethe says in his poem that we have been separated, and I'm happy to listen to the ambassador. We developing countries have to learn from each other, and it's countries from other areas, they always have their own interest, whether they give money or not. Afghanistan has gotten more than $150 billion for aid, but the war has cost $2 trillion. And we went to Afghanistan, when you see this whole amount of money and then you get there and it's all I don't know where the money went, but the country is destroyed, and there are some people who have become billionaires and have their private airplanes, and this is something with things like that happen to this money. The money.
In
Afghanistan, there's not a single hospital where you can treat cancer. And you see, Afghan people give more than $200 million spent on medical treatment in other countries, and they sell their houses, they go into debt so that they can go to other countries to get treated. That's unfortunately the reality. We would like to change that with our organization, and we have a number of areas where we're working. And I would like to say something to the title. The West should not read this title as a provocation. It should view it as an opportunity. If you look at Africa, it's beautiful, it's diverse, but we see only the pictures of war. And if this was a company and you always write only the bad things about the company, then they can't make any business. So the journalists and they report only the bad things. And what I would like is that perhaps Pino can get his post of General Secretary of the UN. When he came first time, he was twice for us in Afghanistan. The first time he was sick, he couldn't sleep. And they had a conference. Afghanistan has brought down opium production by 99%, and he wanted to get the world community to give Afghanistan something to replace this economically, and then and we wanted to try, but the United Nations didn't want to have a conference about this, and they were totally flabbergasted that somebody like that would sit down with the Afghan premier, and that was not their plan from the United Nations.
Ja, ich habe gerade gehört, dass Pino Arlacchi zugeschaltet ist. Er wollte an der Diskussion teilnehmen. Können wir das? Yes. Halb nur, aber jetzt besser, ja.
Thank you. Thank you. I followed the discussion
yes,
in a limited way because there was no English translation, and I'm sorry because you spoke a lot about Afghanistan, and I am working with Mr. Daud and with his associates on the issue of opium in Afghanistan. But I want just now to do some brief remark on what was my impression of the discussion yesterday and today. And I saw a lot of space given to the issue of U.S. decline, of the colonial issue today, but I did not find enough space for an issue that, according to me, should be much more relevant. It is the issue of the alternative. It is the issue of the forces in the international order in the world that are already building an alternative to the USA imperial domination that now is in its terminal phase. And we have a huge opportunity. In this moment, we have the luck to live in an epochal change. The hegemonic transition from the USA to a new world order is a huge opportunity. And we have forces that can build an alternative. For the first time, we have the majority of humanity in terms of population, state, and also in terms of economy that is not anymore Western, is not anymore influenced deeply by imperial power of the USA. It is the so-called Great South, it is the so-called world majority, the rest of the world, that has to work in building and strengthening the alternative. Because now the center of gravity of the world economy shifted already towards the east and towards the south. We have now, in 1980, 70% of world GDP was produced in the West. Now it's the opposite. And now we have the huge historical opportunity to develop the so-called multilateral world, multipolar world. But it is not enough. We have to transform this aspiration into very concrete projects and programs. In transforming this new situation, this new hegemony of the Great South into a political and economical new framework. One of the main issues is what do we do with the United Nations? One of the most urgent things on which we have to work and to think is how we can transform the political majority that is already alive in the General Assembly into a new organization. I'm proposing a reform of the UN, a deep reform of the UN. I don't call it even reform, because reform is a term that is very obsolete. I speak about refoundation of the United Nations in order to make the system coherent with this new world order that is already showing itself. For instance, and this is extremely urgent, look at Iran, aggression against Iran. Look at the war in Ukraine. Look at the Gaza genocide. A real United Nations could have prevented or stopped all these three huge crises, because there are the instruments. The chart of the United Nations have concrete instruments to face these issues, but at the same time, General Assembly already pronounced itself in a very clear way on all these three issues. But the Security Council stopped any action. So the first reform to do, the first change, is abolish veto power and the Security Council, substituting it with a council, an executive council elected directly by the General Assembly, and then valorizing the instruments the UN has in its chart already. Many of these changes that I advocate are already in the chart. We have Article 51 on the right of self-defense. Both Palestinians and Iran could have invoked the right of self-defense, and the UN has articles, the articles from 40 to 45, that foresee very clearly what to do. A military committee comprised by the head of the military of countries that are in the executive body that establish a very detailed program of peace, enforcing not just peacekeeping. For instance, a new UN should enforce peace. When you send soldiers in a war theater, you are not sending doctors or economic experts. You are sending soldiers. These soldiers must be prepared to use force. They don't do that. Look at Lebanon. You have 10,000 peacekeepers. They are there for nothing, just to be a target of Israeli bombs. These are soldiers. What are they doing there? Nothing. Why? Because they have no mandates, they have no clear mandates, they have a very generic mandate of peacekeeping. It means abstaining for intervening concretely into the crisis. They cannot defend the civilian population. They cannot act as an interpositional force between the contenders, and so on. This could have been done in a different UN. Gaza, at the beginning of the first indicators of a genocide is very known. There is also a small office that I promoted during my mandate as Under Secretary General in the United Nations that is devoted exactly to that. When you start to see the first clear indicator of genocides, you have to start an action, international action, and prevent it. Or the role of the UN in guaranteeing peace agreement. If in the Ukrainian case, after the first Minsk agreement that was signed in bad faith by EU countries, it was openly declared by the people who signed it, if an efficient UN, a real UN, could have guaranteed the respect of the agreement, not being completely absent. When the Ukrainian government, after the Minsk agreement, started to bomb the Russian-speaking areas of Ukraine, UN, as a guarantor of the agreement, could have intervened with all possible instruments, from just warning by the Secretary General and by the security body, or even intervening with the forces ready to use force to implement the agreement. Gaza is the same. Gaza is exactly the same. When the first sign that Israel was using a disproportionate amount of force and atrocity, starting a genocide of Palestinian people, UN could have intervened immediately, first in preventing it, but then acting concretely with an adequate military force in protecting Palestinian civilians from the slaughter that is still going on. So, and I conclude, the most urgent thing to do is this, creating. Yesterday I saw a couple of questions for the public to Chinese and Indian people, representatives speaking here, why India and China didn't do nothing in the Iranian crisis, or not doing it in Gaza, and so on. But the answer is not difficult. It's not an issue from China or India. It is an issue of the only instrument that we created to intervene in such a situation, to prevent such a huge violation of the basic international law and all the conflicts and wars and so on. We have these instruments. Why don't we activate it? Now, for the first time, we have a majority on the world that is very clear in this orientation. 80% of the resolution by the General Assembly in the last 15 years have the same orientation. They have been never implemented because of Security Council veto, particularly USA veto, that on some issue like the Palestinian membership of the United Nations has been used all the time against the majority, which is even more than 80% of the General Assembly of the countries of the world. This is the reason why my candidature has been advanced to be the next Secretary General. That has a huge responsibility. The current Secretary General has been a total failure, total absent, or very partially absent, just making some words, and not any action of the system in front of the last crisis. Of course, the last word is on member states. The Secretary General cannot substitute member states or cannot overcome nothing significant made by the competent bodies. But it can be a big stimulus to the bodies of the UN to act according to the Charter, which is, and I conclude, the only instruments we have now to confront and to oppose atrocities, conflicts, and war. Thank you.
I agree with you that the global South and the global majority have to play a much, much greater role. But I think what I would ask all the panelists to think about, and also the audience, it's good to have a new General Secretary when the election comes, but what do we do now? Because, you know, the situation is extremely serious. We have a complete collapse of international law. It does not exist anymore, especially after President Trump declared it to be dead in an interview with the New York Times on January 7th this year. You have a complete collapse of the international order. We talked yesterday about the two, especially the crisis around Ukraine. The update there is that overnight the machine park of the Zaporozhye nuclear facilities were attacked. The Russians are accusing the Ukrainian army that they were behind it. Naturally, Kiev refused that that's the case, but given the fact that this is a nuclear facility which is under the control of Russia, again, like in previous times, it does not make any sense that they would attack it. So I think the evidence points clearly in the direction of Ukraine. And there always the question was, you know, that all the Ukrainians' actions were backed up by the US, by the British for data provision and so forth. So we have an immediate crisis. Then also the situation around Iran. Unfortunately, the Iranian ambassador had to go. It's also reaching an absolute crisis point because, you know, the situation of Prime Minister Netanyahu gets extremely desperate because inside Israel there is now a big eruption of a debate that, you know, the Zionist model may lead to the, you know, loss of existence of Israel as a state. So Netanyahu is getting increasingly desperate, and, you know, this is, you know, bringing forward the immediate possibility of that crisis escalating as well. So it seems to me that, you know, while I think think what you are saying for your your UN candidacy for the General Secretary sounds very promising, and we will think about supporting it. But I would say the crisis is now, because if we don't solve these two problems, that, you know, what we discussed yesterday about the Russians saying that the last straw has been crossed, and, you know, that now decisive actions against decision-making centers in Europe probably will be targeted. And I think this is a question of which would happen within hours and within days. So what can we do? Because I have been thinking about this for a long time, and the situation between Europe and the United States is hopeless. There is no maneuvering room for some immediate improvement. The situation with Russia in general is also hopeless, because the demonization of Putin has gone so far that people in Europe are pretty brainwashed on that topic. This China improved recently, because when Merz was pushed by the German industry to basically say we have to normalize relations because the German economy is in a free fall, and Economic Minister Katharina Reiche just went too, and apparently her visit goes in the same direction, improving relations between Germany and China. But this is not enough to address this immediate strategic situation. So I have been thinking the whole time that the only factor which could make a difference in the world situation is the fact that the Global South is the global majority. They represent 80 to 85% of the human population, but they're not unified enough. So you know, even BRICS is being targeted. If every single country by BRICS is targeted for destabilization. Brazil, obviously China, Russia, Iran, South Africa, Nigeria, all of these countries are under heavy attack and destabilization. But, you know, what can we do to encourage the unification of the Global South? Because in the Bandung conference, President Nehru and Sukarno and Chu Enlai were discussing that the issue of war and peace is something which concerns the Global South as much as the Global North, because if it ever comes to nuclear war, they will be affected as much as the North, and they may die a few weeks later, because it takes a while until the radioactive fallout travels to the southern hemisphere. But since we are sitting in one boat, my question to all of you and the audience is to, you know, because I think we should come out of this conference with a clear message, you know, that this immediate war danger has to be addressed. And, you know, I think the only way would be if all the leaders, or at least a significant number of leaders from the Global South, would just say, you know, you have no right to blow the world up, and we will break you completely, because, you know, we are the global majority and we represent the interest of humanity. So that is my question I want to put for discussion.
Well, one of the things we're doing is running independent campaigns that are rallying the population to do what Helga's talking about. That we need in the United States the voices of the majority to be heard. And I think this is the challenge all over the world. If you look at the support for the governments across the board in the United States, in Great Britain, France, Germany, there's no support for the governments. But the population is not moving. And we have to provide the voices and the impetus to get that moving. And what we're trying to do with the campaigns in the US, Diane Sayre is a candidate for president. Jose Vega is a candidate for Congress in the Bronx in New York. And we're working to pull together independent candidacies that will address these issues. That's one thing we can do, but it requires a lot of work in the U.S. It requires money, and you're up against a very committed enemy. But that's why it's important as well for these voices to be heard from the Global South. And I think we who live in the West should do everything possible to make sure that voices from Africa, from East Asia, from South America can be heard. And we have to be very creative in doing that. But this is something that through social media, through other forms, must be done. And I think what we'll find is that it's the hunger for real leadership that exists out there. And people should not be scared to speak up. You know, I've lived now in Germany for 10 years, and as much as I love this country, I see the fear of speaking up. And we have to overcome that fear, and that requires all of us to reach out to our neighbors, to our fellow countrymen, our collaborators at work, and so on, to get this message across that this is an opportunity to not just stop war, which is imminent, we're already in wars, but to establish a new era of peace. And it requires courage and persistence. There's not much else you can say about that.
I mean, thank you so much. I kind of agree, but this is a very important, if I may, it's $1 million question, Helga, you raised. And if we know the answer to that, we wouldn't be in this predicament at the world. But you know, as a diplomat, what I would see is a need to have more engagement and coalition building. As you said, even the voice of the Global South is fractured. We don't always speak in one voice because we have our own priorities, and our priorities don't necessarily align. So there is a need even to agree on the urgency of some issues. The two conflicts you've mentioned, they are affecting everyone, and everyone is feeling the pinch of that. If I may quote one of the former Secretary General Kofi Annan once said, poverty, conflict in one corner of the world is a threat to peace for the whole world. We have to adapt that mentality where we, instead of compartmentalizing our issues, our thinking, we have to have that. But with regard to the reform of the Security Council, which is really long overdue, I mean, we don't seem to have the commitment from the political, forces to reform, fundamentally reform the Security Council. As we speak, we don't have an alternative mechanism that can play the role. And personally, I don't think we have to reinvent the wheel, but we have to reform it. It has to be, as you said, inclusive. It has to be representative. It has to reflect the world as is today. But when we fail to do that, and there is a saying in my country, if you delay something from doing it, it will come as a revolution later. So we have to have the means, the pressure to make sure that not just the Security Council now is we see it because it literally failed, not only to prevent conflicts, to even pronounce itself on some issues that are clear for everyone. There's a lot of jostling happening there. So the financial architecture also, how we access finance and everything, that has to be reformed. So my humble recommendation as a diplomat will be to engage more, but also to build alliance, bring forward the sense of urgency that is out there, and then on that we will be able to do that. For instance, I know the Shirley Institute come up with some, position papers or documents where countries can, coalesce to or subscribe for. That kind of drive, I think, is important to bring this message on board. Thank you.
Ich wollte nur auch eins dazu sagen.
I want to say something about that, because in this country, for me, who has children here, these who are very small, young still, so all the threats which has to be serious from Russia, if they would use tactical nuclear weapons, Germany would be immediately affected. I think really seriously about what should I do. Should I send my kids still to school, or is it already too late? I think these are very serious ideas, and we have to think about it. And what was said yesterday, the war against Iran has led to a situation that the world has become poorer, that the problems have increased. And I've talked to my friends in the Gulf states who are working there. The people have to be dismissed, because everything which was flourishing is come to a still stand, and that is a transformation where a lot of other people profited from that. But at the same time, we see that the number of billionaires are increasing every day. This is a real catastrophe which is affecting us all, and everybody in his own area must make ideas how we can solve that. But everybody is responsible for that. I think a new Bandung conference would not be impossible if a handful of leading spokesmen of the southern area would agree to that. That would be interesting for everybody, and would be a counterpoint. We have to think about how to bring that about. I still have the idea. I would like to send a question to the young people from Africa. You are the global future, the global future of the global South. Probably somebody from your side can say something about that.
Hello, thank you very much. Yeah, it's quite true that we are the future. I think we spoke about it yesterday. Africa is the future. We have the population, we have the resources. I think it's also about management, leadership, and several collaboration. And I think we're also talking a lot about our relationship with Western countries. But I think, first of all, we should focus about the relationship within ourselves. Like talk about Ethiopia and their relationship with their neighbors, and also West African countries and our relationship with our neighbors. I think if we can solve our issues internally first, then we can be more united to solve the issues against the Western powers as well. I think that's where we should start.
Talking about the relationship between Ethiopia and its neighbors, I would like to know your take about the Tigray conflict and how can we solve it once for all?
Regarding this wonderful question by Helga about the fragmented global South, I think it's a pity I will be speaking a little bit about the colonization of India. But the fact is that, for example, border between India and Pakistan is completely closed. 500,000 soldiers are wasting their life standing in the snow with minus 40, 50 degrees in the winter, facing each other. No communication is going on. So the global south is in that way fragmented because of the effects of colonization. This is exactly what the British wanted, to divide and rule. And this division after 75 years is still there. So the global south has a lot to do. But there is a very good news that India and China have normalized their relation, and more Indians are realizing that we don't want to be used as a bulwark against China, that we should not be mobilized this thing. So there is a challenge for global south. And as Nehru actually envisioned, and as Helga mentioned it, probably see the historical experience and see what can we really do about this, that this fighting and especially the situation in Europe is unbearable. Thank you very much.
Merci. Parler en français.
I'm going to speak in French. Between 34 and 70 years are youth. So I think I'm youth from Africa. First, I would like to thank the Schiller Institute to have invited me to this important conference, which come at a good moment. The thinkings which are made here inspired me a lot. This is in the right direction of our thinking. This is exactly this way which we are thinking. I learned things important here, and I share it. The multilateralism is a reality. It's imposing itself, and the last events which we have seen have demonstrated sufficiently that we have today the era of the diktats and the unilateral decisions. It's ended now, it's finished. And secondly, it's also coming with the end of the colonialism and of the neo-colonialism. The colonialism has been a human tragedy. And today, at the United Nations, the slavery has been considered as a crime, even if some states voted against. So it's a new era which is approaching from us, and we need to have each one's preparing themselves to build something new which will save our planet. The last astronauts demonstrated that our planet is too small in the cosmos. So we have to protect it. It's from our responsibility, and you do it very well here, the Schiller Institute. We'd have to make a coalition to demonstrate that together we can find solutions. It's not good to say, as I could say, to go in an egg and to try to fight against a mountain. It's not going to work. We're going to destroy ourselves. So we have to make a partnership to build this partnership. We have to build this partnership. And the message which I want to give you is that we have to ask Europe to bring back, to find again its noble values again. And the United States and the other powerful nations should not act violently. And to Africa, we have not to, I would say, we have not to only cry. We have to wake up and to build together. As our brother, the ambassador of Ethiopia, said, the African Union is a power, an important power. Global South, we can make coming a change, and we can use the good thinking of Asia, which we listened yesterday. Thank you a lot for your invitation, and it's a great honor to listen and to be here. Thank you.
Ja, ja, wir haben natürlich noch folgende Alternative,
We have the following alternative to not to prolong the conference or, too much into the afternoon, that we shorten the lunch break that we have, so that if the audience is agreeable to that, before that, I guess that the speakers here would like to comment on the.
Ja, also ich möchte gerne.
So, I would like to. Obviously, we have to find an answer to the acute
diese enorme Chance, die in der Kooperation mit dem globalen Süden liegt, wirklich erkennen.
enormous and recognize the enormous chance and opportunity that is given by the
Weg Äthiopiens dargestellt haben. Das ist eigentlich.
I would like to thank the ambassador for his optimistic view. It would be very good if we had more people talking about so optimistic about Germany as you talked about Ethiopia. But the future is obviously that in the cooperation between Europe, the BRICS, and Africa. And the rebuilding of Southwest Asia. So the reality must be in the year 2050, there will be a billion people more in Africa. They will grow from 1.5 to 2.5 billion people. So we have one generation time.
1 Milliarde produktive Arbeitsplätze zu schaffen in Afrika. Und das ist eigentlich eine unglaubliche Chance, weil
so this is a chance
ganz klar in eine Sackgasse geraten. Also
because we in Germany we are in a dead end road, really, and with the unconditional surrender to the Anglo-Americans that have we have as a result a German industry in free fall. Jacques has often said that about where's the situation worse, and I say it's in Germany, but he says it's in France, but in a sense that's not a big difference. And if I talk to my Italian friends, they would claim the situation is not really better in Italy, and the situation in Africa, in Spain, is catastrophically. We have a small group in Spain who couldn't be here, unfortunately, for technical and organization, logistical reasons. But we had a telephone conference, but they reported that the migration crisis is even worse than in Italy or Germany.
where the immigrants are brutally just thrown out of the country. So where's the way out? It's
Konzentrationslager entlang dem Mittelmeer aufzubauen und sogenannte Auffanglager für die
we have
Migranten. Das Wort
these
Konzentrationslager
camps,
kommt
the
von Franziskus,
term
der
concentration
diesen
camp was
Krieg
used
der
by,
EU, sogenannte Auffanglager in
we
Libyen,
have
in der Türkei
these
und überall in
camps in Libya, in Turkey, and
dass
other.
also
So the
die
idea is,
Politik der
so
Konzentrationslager
this is
greift.
essentially the policy of concentration camps, and that cannot be the solution. What we need is that countries like Ethiopia, Ethiopia has demonstrated a high level of consciousness about their own well-being, and we must make this much more knowledgeable, prominent in Germany. There's one point where I would have reservations to what you say. Somebody talked about a black race. I don't think in races. I think there's only one human race. And the only difference is that we can handle sunlight a little bit less efficient. We in Germany will only come out of the economic crisis if we join in such building efforts like what Ethiopia is doing. We have Transaqua, a wonderful project that could move 3 or 4% of the waters of the Congo, divert them, and create a system of channels and direct it to the Lake Chad, which at present is only at 10% of its former volume. So this could be refilled, and that could be used for irrigation to create a area. 12 nations along the project could be given electricity, could build industrial parks. So we could, in the center of Africa, create a real big transformation. Then you have on the Congo, you have the Inga Dam system. That's a system of different dams, and that could be a co between Europe and China. And so this could all be totally turned around. So we could use that as a peace policy, because the new name for peace is development. And if the UN is reformed, a very important part of that is going to be or needs to be that the financial system, which is hopelessly bankrupt, we're sitting on $2.4 quadrillion of paper that cannot be paid and financed. We need a new Glass-Steagall program. We need national states in every country to organize long-term financing for big projects. And then we could get all problems of the world under control within a year or 2 years. And what is missing is just the political will to do that. We have in Xinjiang, China has demonstrated that irrigation is possible. There's a wonderful video. Perhaps our technicians can find the link to be put in the chat. A video that shows how China has greened the desert with a very complicated water droplet system. There's huge
amount of work to be done in the beginning. But once you do that, then there's the development of forests, and the whole weather system changes. So you do one input of a lot of work, and then nature does a lot of the next steps. So we have a similar program for the Southwest Asia, the Oasis Plan, the enlarged Oasis Plan, and the Ibn Sina project is a part of that. So the idea is a connection from the Mediterranean to the Black Sea through to the Caspian Lake. Today, with you can with satellites locate water systems underground, and you can find where these water resources are in the underground, and you can access them and use them. So we have the China-Pakistan economic corridor. There's the North-South transportation corridor from St. Petersburg to India. So these are projects that just need to expand it and connect it, and Jordan and have one corridor going to Turkey. So just like in the time of the historical Silk Road, you can build infrastructure to make the whole region to a nodal point between Africa, Europe, and Asia. So this would solve a lot of problems. And Afghanistan would be part of the program. Iraq would be rebuilt, which is still destroyed. Syria is still destroyed. And Lebanon has been destroyed. All these regions are hungry for development. So we have to make clear a new name for peace is development. That must be a mass movement. People must not only protest against war, they would have to mobilize for development. And the new Pope, Leo XIV, he, if you read all his messages and declarations, they're very important because this Pope has attacked the US government for its wars, and the companies that profit from war, and he has picked up the idea of Nikolaus von Kues that all problems can be solved through the concept of the coincidence of opposites, because we're one humanity. And this idea of the one humanity that is working together, so this must be our war cry. We must encourage people to fight for that, to work for that. And that must be the solution.
Ja, also mein Vorschlag bleibt, dass wir dann nach Abschluss, es sind ja noch zwei, drei Fragen offen gewesen, ob die wirklich dringend sind, müssen Sie selbst beurteilen. Natürlich können Sie die Fragen stellen.
Very important questions right now, or whether we can postpone those questions. And I would suggest that we don't break and have a short rearrangement here, and then continue with the second part of this panel. That depends on we have a number of other presentations.
Wer hat denn alles noch eine Frage? Bitte, bitte, bitte alle strecken, dann
So he's getting questions from the. I'm from Braunschweig. I would like to say two things. Helga's question of the saving the world, I have the proposal that you have short, pregnant statements to Gaza, genocide, the expanding of NATO. So there are many groups that agree with that, and we have to address them and integrate them. That's one. The other question to that was not the technological progress is immense, and it is turning into a danger, but it also an opportunity to that much of the work can be done by robots. So and that means that we can enjoy our life. Then we have a therapy of the finding your own sense of existence, raison d'être, so I think that's 2 points that I wanted to raise. So perhaps the robots will bring us communism, the future society of communism.
Ja, guten Tag, ich bin Rüdiger Ballnert. Das ist ja alles sehr schön gut, was Sie da so erzählen.
Well, what you're saying, but you know that there are important global players who profit a lot from the present system, like BlackRock. So we need strategies. There are more and more millionaires and billionaires, and they're all connected. So we have to find ways how to oppose them and develop a strategy. And we need specialists who know this and who have to be on our side. So we have to protect ourselves from the abuse of technologies. So for whom is artificial intelligence working? Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon to all, and thank you very much for your insight. I have a question. So I am a student, and I study international and water management. We all study different courses, and we come from different backgrounds. So my question is, how do we position ourselves as individuals in our career to work towards this plan of unifying the global south? Because I am well aware that technological advances is the way to go, yes, but it's really, really insufficient if you want to make real change in our communities. Thank you.
I just want to contribute on this issue of partnership. So from us as Africans, our main challenge on working together with Europe is on having mutual benefits. We are lacking this thing of partnership. In other words, it's only benefiting one part instead of two parties. Wouldn't it be a good idea to come up with an international union where we write down rules or guidelines that can promote this mutual partnership, so that if it's explicit to everyone, if it's written down, that if we need to carry out this partnership, there is a rule, there is a guideline that everyone knows internationally, that we follow this I think that can result in having partnerships that benefits both of us, that is Europe and Africa. For example, what we need as Africa right now, we have the brain, but we are lacking infrastructure and technology. For us to be able to learn this technology with the required infrastructure, it might be wise to form partnerships with Europe where they sponsor us to learn this technology in their countries and then take it back to our countries. But for us, we can't do that because it's very expensive. So we can do that as a start, as an initiative of benefiting learning with the European infrastructure technology that we need to develop our own Africa as a nation. Thank you.
Ja, ich wurde gerade darauf hingewiesen, es ist aber auch ein
I was told that there will be a lunch. It was already ordered. There's no way that there will be no pause. That means that when there are no comments anymore, that we will have a pause at 1 p.m. and at 2 p.m. we will continue.
Ja, ich möchte also, ich denke mal, die letzte Frage.
So I think the last question I can only support. I think we need these partnerships, because as long as each group and each nation and each group in each nation only fights for their own interest, we are divided and won't succeed. We, from the International Peace Coalition, have since a few months, it's not a new idea, but we have re-actualized it. We need to build up a worldwide movement of world citizens, which is working organizatorily together. Each human being needs to first think in the terms of interest of the whole humanity, and then after that comes their own particular interest. And if we network, then we are the majority. The people in Europe who are against this war policy, BlackRock or Epstein class, these are only 0.1% maybe even much less than that. Only a few maybe a few 100,000 people are part of this Epstein class, and these are then there are those people who hang on to power, those people who sit up in the Olymp as gods, Epstein class, and then there are these hangers onto power. They are hanging on the edge. They also want to be part of it. They would like to have these privileges, but then there's a big gap towards the normal population. And I have in my whole political life never lost the belief in humanity, because I know that the normal people, they are good. I can give you 100 examples. No matter what, in what country, in Iran, for example, we have 2 travel reports. They were all the same, and how much hospitality there is from the people. Also in USA, if you go into a small city or town, you are also very heartily welcome. Also in Germany, I had many different occasions when you talk, when you buy wine in a small enterprise, you can talk with people, or when your car crashes far off from any city, it doesn't cost a lot, only like 30 euros. So there's a lot of good if we give people the chance to hope again. People are so pessimistic. They think there's no way to change. We have many book tables, info stands, and people say these up there are too powerful. There's nothing we can do. This sense we should be punished. is not allowed to be said, or you come into prison. That's the pessimism which stifles the people. Franklin Roosevelt said, "There's nothing to fear but fear itself." And I think when this idea, there's a way out, there's a clear perspective of partnerships with young people in Africa, with universities in the whole world, then we can realize that idea that we are the global majority, and those people who are in a position in Europe, in a position to that, who are for the war policy, we are the majority, then we need to understand that. And if this comes into our consciousness, then the bridge is really, really simple.
Just 1 minute, because there was one issue raised. I won't take long. I know we don't have time. You know, the youth in the background, they have raised an interesting point. I just want to highlight some developments that are not necessarily known here. For instance, trading amongst ourselves. We were very poor at it as Africa. And fortunately, the African Union, in its agenda 2063, the Africa we want, has launched the African Continental Free Trade Area, which is the second largest trading bloc next to the World Trade Organization. People don't know about it. Africa is doing it. Are we doing it as fast as we want? Maybe not, but we're going there. And our partnership with Europe, actually with Germany, for instance, should help us in ensuring that, because we look at the European Union and how they do it, help us to implement that effectively so that we also become economically independent by trading amongst ourselves. The second is the issue of youth. It may not be a big deal here, but in my country, the conundrum with the youth population, as I said, average age in my country is 19. Close to 80% of the population is young, which means we have to create opportunity for the youth. So youth issues has to be mainstreamed in the main agenda of the government, in the day-to-day activities of the government. Why? Somebody was saying a two-edged sword. It is, because if we could provide decent opportunities for the youth of today, they will be the force that drives development, not just in the continent, in the world tomorrow. But if we fail to provide a decent opportunity, that will be a challenge to peace and security, migration all over the world. So that has to be one of the priorities. And one colleague from the background asked me about what's happening in my country with Tigray. You know, in Pretoria, when we sit down, many people don't know it, when we sit down to negotiate, when we stop the guns through the Pretoria Agreement, most of the things happen in our own language. We sit down and said, do we want that? Don't we have other priorities? We should be able to appeal to the best in us and say, how best can we resolve these issues? That resolve is still there. We're doing our best to make sure that we talk and find a resolution. But it's not easy. There are always detractors. There are issues that are cropping up. In the Horn of Africa region, there are powers that are sophisticating conflicts. So we have to find a way of finding African solution. It's not just a motto. We have to drive our development. We have to drive our peace efforts. We have to finance our development. If the dam we built proves one thing, we can, as Africa, finance major infrastructure projects that contribute to our development. We don't have to look to Germany. We don't have to look to China. They can partner with us, but we can do it. And the youth of Africa will be a force to be reckoned with in the coming 10, 20 years. And that's what I believe. Thank you so much.
So, also die Pause beginnt jetzt. 14 Uhr.
So now the pause is beginning now. At 2 p.m. we start. Please be on time.